Before the sun drops behind the ridge, someone out here is going to break. The only question is who. The wind whispered through dry grass as Nayeli stumbled forward and fell to her knees in the dust, her fingers clutching at the earth like it might hold her together, her breath shaking, her voice barely more than air. I can't bear this pain anymore. And it wasn't clear if she meant the shallow cut along her side or the weight sitting behind her eyes, the kind no bandage could reach, the kind that followed a person across miles of open land without ever making a sound. 10 feet away, Ethan Cole stood still beside his horse, one hand resting lightly against the worn leather saddle, his gaze fixed on her without urgency, without fear, like a man who had learned long ago that rushing into another person's storm only made it worse. The sun hanging low behind him cast a long shadow that stretched toward her but never quite touched, and for a moment neither of them moved, just the wind pushing dust across the canyon floor, carrying the scent of dry sage and distant rain that would never reach this place. Nayeli's shoulders trembled as she tried to rise, failing once, then again, her strength slipping through her fingers like sand, and still she didn't look at him, because she knew what he was the moment she saw the hat, the boots, the quiet way he stood his ground. White man, outsider, someone who didn't belong to her world, and someone she had been taught not to trust. Her hand drifted toward her side. Not the wound, but something hidden beneath the torn fabric. A small blade tucked close like the last piece of control she had left. Ethan saw the movement, saw the hesitation, but he didn't reach for his gun. Instead, he let his hand fall slowly from the saddle. Then even slower, he unbuckled the gun belt at his waist, the metal clasp giving a soft click that seemed louder than it should have in the open silence, and he lowered it to the ground between them, not as surrender, not as weakness, just as a quiet statement. I'm not here to fight you. The dust settled over the leather and steel as if swallowing the gesture whole, and only then did he take a step forward, boots pressing into the dry earth with a sound that barely carried. Nayeli noticed, of course she noticed, her eyes lifting just enough to catch the movement, dark and sharp even through the haze of pain. And for a second there was fire there, not fear, not yet, but warning, don't come closer, don't cross that line. But the line had already been crossed the moment she collapsed, the moment her body chose truth over pride. Ethan stopped a few feet away, close enough to see the fine layer of dust clinging to her skin, the way her breath hitched unevenly, the way her hands trembled not just from weakness but from something deeper, something breaking loose. You're bleeding, he said, voice low, steady, not a question, not an accusation, just a fact laid gently between them. Nayeli let out a short breath that might have been a laugh if it didn't sound so tired. It's not that, she whispered, her fingers tightening against the ground as if she could dig herself into it and disappear. It's everything else. And that was the first crack, not in her body, but in the wall she had been holding up for miles. Ethan didn't answer right away, didn't step closer, didn't offer empty words. He just stood there and let the silence stretch, because sometimes silence was the only thing that didn't lie. The wind shifted again, carrying with it a faint sound from somewhere beyond the ridge, distant, rhythmic, easy to miss if you weren't listening for it. Hoofbeats, still far, but coming. And Ethan's eyes flicked briefly toward the horizon before returning to her, calculating, measuring distance, time, choices. Nayeli heard it too. Of course she did, her head turning slightly, her body tensing despite the exhaustion pulling her down. Whatever she was running from wasn't far behind, and whatever it wasn't something she believed she could outrun anymore. Her hand slipped from the ground, her balance gone, and this time when she leaned forward, there was no strength left to catch herself. But she didn't hit the dirt. Ethan moved, just enough, just in time, his hands steady as he caught her shoulders, not tight, not forceful, just enough to keep her from falling apart. In that moment, her body stiffened instantly, instinct kicking in, distrust rising like a reflex she couldn't shut off, but it didn't last, because the strength wasn't there to hold it. Her head lowered, her breath uneven against his chest, and for a second she seemed to forget where she was, who he was, what any of it meant. I can't bear this pain anymore, she said again, softer this time, like the words were leaving her whether she wanted them to or not. And Ethan felt it then, not the wound, not the fear, but the weight behind those words, the kind that didn't come from one moment, but from too many moments stacked together until they became something a person couldn't carry alone. He didn't ask what happened, didn't ask where she came from, didn't ask who was chasing her. Those questions could wait, or maybe they didn't matter at all. Instead, he shifted his grip slightly, just enough to steady her, just enough to make sure she didn't slip away again. And he spoke, quiet, firm, like he was saying something simple and unchangeable. Then don't. A pause, a breath, the wind moving around them like it was listening too, not alone. And for the first time since he touched her, she didn't pull away, didn't reach for the blade, didn't try to stand on her own. She just stayed there, held between falling and standing, between running and stopping, between a world that had broken her and something she didn't understand yet. And out beyond the ridge, the sound of hoofbeats grew just a little louder. The sound carried clearer now. No longer just a whisper hidden inside the wind, but a steady rhythm pressing closer across the open land. And Ethan did not need to turn his head again to know how far they were, how fast they were moving, and how little time remained before distance became nothing at all. His eyes stayed on Nayeli, on the way her weight leaned into him without resistance now. Not trust, not yet, but something quieter, something closer to surrender. Her breath uneven, her fingers still curled as if holding on to something that was no longer there. Can you stand? He asked, not pushing, not pulling, just offering the question like a choice she could still make. Nayeli did not answer right away, her gaze drifting past him toward the empty stretch of desert, as if she could still measure a path forward. But the truth settled in her shoulders before her voice ever came. No, she said, barely above a whisper, and it was not defeat, it was honesty. The kind that costs more than pride. Ethan nodded once, small, almost invisible, and shifted his stance, adjusting his grip so that her weight rested easier against him, one arm steady at her back, the other ready but careful, never closing more than needed, never holding tighter than necessary, because he understood something most men did not. That strength was not in taking control, it was in knowing how little of it to use. The horse behind him shifted its hooves softly against the dirt, sensing the tension, the urgency, the change in its rider's breath. Ethan stepped back slowly, guiding Nayeli with him, one careful movement at a time, her boots dragging faint lines in the dust, each step costing her more than the last, and still she tried. Even now, even when her body had already chosen its limit, she tried to carry herself, but the effort only made her sway, her balance slipping again. And this time he did not wait for her to fall. He moved closer, lifting just enough to take the weight she could not hold. And for a brief second her hand pressed against his chest, not pushing, not resisting, just steadying herself. And something in that contact shifted, small, almost unnoticeable, but real. The distance between them no longer a line drawn in fear, but something softer, something uncertain. The hoofbeats rolled again across the land, closer now, close enough that even the horse lifted its head, ears turning toward the sound. Ethan glanced once more toward the ridge, calculating again, always calculating, then reached for the saddle with his free hand, his movements efficient, practiced, the kind that came from years of doing more with less time than a man ever wanted. We need to move, he said, voice still calm, still even, but carrying a weight that did not need to be explained. Nayeli's eyes flicked to his face then, searching, questioning, measuring him the same way he measured the horizon, and for a moment it seemed like she might refuse, might pull away, might choose the open land over the unknown of riding with him. But the sound behind them answered for her, steady, unrelenting, and whatever choice she thought she had left slipped away with it. Where? She asked, her voice thin but steady enough to hold the word together. Ethan did not look back this time, did not point, did not explain. Away, he said simply, and something in the way he said it made it sound like a place you could actually reach, not a direction, not a guess, but a promise shaped like a single word. He guided her toward the horse, turning her gently so that she could lean against the saddle for support, the worn leather warm from the sun, familiar in a way that felt almost grounding even to her. His hand hovered near her arm, ready, but never closing until she needed it, giving her the space to choose each movement, to hold on to what little control she still had. I will help you up, he said, not asking, not ordering, just stating what would happen next, and she nodded once, slow, deliberate, accepting without saying the word. He moved then, one smooth motion, lifting her carefully, mindful of the way her body tensed, mindful of the line he could not cross. And when she settled into the saddle, her breath caught, not from pain alone, but from the sudden shift, the height, the imbalance. And for a second her hand reached out again, this time finding his shoulder, gripping lightly, grounding herself in something solid, something that did not move beneath her. Ethan stepped back only when he felt her balance settle, his eyes scanning her quickly, checking, measuring, making sure she would not slip. Then he reached down, picked up the gun belt from the dust, and fastened it back around his waist without urgency, without rush, like a man who did not fear what was coming, only respected it. The hoofbeats rolled again, closer now, close enough that the shape of riders would soon rise over the ridge. Nayeli turned her head slightly, her gaze fixed in that direction, and for the first time since he found her, something like fear crossed her face openly. Not hidden, not buried, just there, real and unguarded. "They will not stop," she said quietly. Not a warning, not a threat, just a truth she had already accepted. Ethan rested his hand briefly against the horse's neck, feeling the steady strength beneath his palm, then looked up at her, his expression unchanged, calm as ever, but his voice carried something firm beneath it, something that did not bend. "Neither will we," he said. And in that moment, as the wind shifted and the riders drew closer, as the distance between danger and choice narrowed to nothing, Nayeli did not argue, did not question. She simply held on, not to the saddle, not to the fading strength in her body, but to the quiet certainty in his voice, the kind that did not ask for belief, only offered it. And somewhere between the first step he took beside the horse and the second, something inside her stopped running. The horse moved at a steady pace, not fast, not slow, just enough to put distance between them and the sound behind. Ethan walking beside it with one hand resting lightly on the reins, his steps measured, deliberate, as if he had already chosen the path long before this moment arrived. Nayeli sat in the saddle with her back slightly bent, her hands gripping the worn leather horn, her breathing uneven but quieter now, each breath still heavy but no longer breaking apart. The land stretched wide around them, miles of dry earth and scattered brush, the kind of place where a person could disappear if they knew where to go. And Ethan did. He always did, his eyes scanning ahead, not searching, just confirming, the way a man does when he already trusts the direction he is heading. The hoofbeats behind them grew louder for a moment, then softened again as the wind shifted, playing tricks with distance, but neither of them mistook the truth. They were still being followed, and they would be for a while yet. Nayeli shifted slightly in the saddle, wincing as the movement pulled at her side, her hand instinctively pressing against the fabric as if to hold herself together. But it was not the pain in her body that unsettled her now. It was the silence beside her, the way Ethan said nothing more. After that single promise, the way he did not ask questions, did not demand answers, did not look at her like she owed him anything. That kind of silence was unfamiliar, almost unsettling, because it left space for thoughts she had been running from. "Why are you helping me?" she asked finally, her voice stronger than before, but still carrying the weight of something unresolved. Ethan did not look up right away, his boots pressing into the dirt with the same steady rhythm as before. "You needed it," he said simply, as if that was enough, as if that was the whole reason and nothing more needed to be added. Nayeli frowned slightly, her gaze lingering on him, searching for something hidden beneath the words. "That is not a reason," she said, quieter now, not challenging, just questioning. Ethan let out a small breath, almost a sigh, but not tired, just thoughtful. "Out here," he said after a moment. "It usually is." His voice remained calm, unchanged, but there was something beneath it. Now, something that suggested experience, something that had been learned the hard way and kept without explanation. Nayeli looked away then, her eyes drifting across the empty land. And for a moment she said nothing, because part of her wanted to reject that answer, to push it aside as too simple, too easy. But another part of her, the part that was tired of carrying everything alone, recognized something in it, something she could not argue with. The wind shifted again, brushing against her face, carrying the faint scent of smoke this time, distant, almost gone. but enough to stir memory. Her grip tightened on the saddle, her shoulders stiffening slightly. Ethan noticed. Of course he noticed. He noticed everything. But he did not ask. Instead, he slowed his pace just a fraction, giving her time to steady herself without drawing attention to it. The kind of adjustment most people would not even realize was happening. "They will not stop because of you," Nayeli said after a while. Her voice lower now, almost lost in the wind. "They will stop because of what they think I did." Ethan glanced up at her then, not sharply, not with suspicion, just with quiet attention. "And what do they think you did?" he asked. The question simple, open, without judgment. Nayeli hesitated, her lips pressing together as if the words themselves carried weight she was not ready to release. Her eyes drifting again toward the horizon behind them, where the riders would soon appear if they had not already. "Something they cannot forgive," she said finally. And there was no anger in her voice, no fear, just certainty. The kind that comes from knowing how people see you and understanding that their version of the truth rarely changes. Ethan nodded once, as if that answer fit into something he already understood. "People out here," he said quietly. "They hold on to stories longer than they hold on to facts." Nayeli looked down at him again, her expression shifting, not softer, not yet, but different, like she was seeing him not just as a man passing through her path, but as someone who had walked through something similar in his own way. "And you?" she asked, her voice careful, measured. "What story do they tell about you?" Ethan did not answer right away, his gaze returning to the path ahead, the lines in his face catching the light of the lowering sun. For a moment it seemed like he might ignore the question entirely, let it fall into the silence the way most things did. But then he spoke, his voice steady, unchanged. "Depends on who you ask," he said. And that was all. No details, no explanation. Just enough to let her know that he understood more than he was willing to say. Nayeli let out a quiet breath, something between a sigh and a release, and leaned back slightly in the saddle, her grip loosening just enough to show the shift, the trust not spoken but beginning to take shape in small ways. The hoofbeats behind them grew louder again, this time not fading with the wind, this time holding steady, closer than before, close enough that the air itself seemed to carry their presence. Ethan's hand tightened slightly on the reins, not from fear, but from readiness, his pace quickening just enough to match the urgency. "Hold on," he said quietly, not looking up, not needing to. Nayeli adjusted her position, her body still weak, but her focus sharper now, her hand finding the saddle again, steady, prepared. And for the first time since he found her, she did not look back at what was chasing them. She looked forward instead, toward wherever he was leading her. And somewhere in that choice, small as it was, something shifted again, something stronger than fear, something that felt almost like trust. Even if she was not ready to call it that yet, the land began to change in small ways that only someone who knew it would notice. The flat stretch of open dust giving way to uneven ground, scattered rocks rising like quiet warnings beneath the surface. Ethan adjusted his path without hesitation, guiding the horse slightly off the visible trail, his boots stepping where the earth held firmer, where tracks would not linger long. The kind of route that did not invite followers. Nayeli felt the shift beneath her, the subtle tilt of the saddle, the careful turns that did not seem random, and she realized then that he was not just moving forward, he was choosing how they would be followed, or not followed at all. The hoofbeats behind them rolled closer again, no longer distant, no longer uncertain. They were there now, somewhere beyond the ridge, closing the space between what was and what was coming. Ethan glanced once toward a narrow break between two rising stone formations ahead, barely wide enough for a single rider to pass through, shadow already pooling inside as the sun dipped lower. "We go through there," he said, his voice low but certain. Nayeli followed his gaze, her eyes narrowing slightly, measuring the path, the kind of place where a person could disappear for a while, but not forever. "That will not stop them," she said quietly, not doubting him, just stating what she knew. Ethan nodded once. "No," he replied, "but it will slow them down." And that was enough, because out here, time was the only thing that could be turned into distance, and distance was the closest thing to safety either of them had. He quickened his pace slightly, the horse responding with a steady forward motion, its hooves pressing into the firmer ground with a rhythm that felt more controlled now, more intentional. Naeli held on, her body still weak, but her focus sharpening with each passing moment. The wind shifted again, cooler now as the sun lowered, carrying with it the faint echo of voices, not clear, not close enough to understand, but enough to confirm what they already knew. They were not imagining the pursuit. It was real, it was steady, and it was not turning away. As they reached the narrow pass, Ethan placed his hand briefly against the horse's side, guiding it through the opening, the space tight enough that Naeli could feel the brush of stone near her leg, the air inside cooler, quieter, the sound of the outside world dimming slightly as the walls rose around them, shadows stretching longer, swallowing the light in pieces. Ethan followed close behind, his movements precise, his attention shifting from the horizon to the details of the ground, the way the dust settled, the way the rocks shifted under weight, every small sign that might give them away. Once they cleared the pass, the land opened again, but differently. This time, not wide and exposed, but broken, uneven, filled with dips and rises that could hide a person if they knew how to use them. Ethan slowed then, just enough to change the rhythm, just enough to let the sound of their movement blend with the land instead of cutting through it. Naeli looked back once, instinct pulling her gaze toward the path they had taken, but the narrow pass already swallowed most of it. The entrance harder to spot from this side, the kind of place you would miss if you did not know exactly where to look. "You have done this before," she said, her voice carrying a quiet realization. Ethan did not look at her, his eyes still scanning ahead. "Enough," he answered, and there was no pride in it, no weight, just a simple acknowledgement of experience. Naeli studied him for a moment longer, then turned her gaze forward again, her grip on the saddle steady, her breathing more controlled now, not because the danger was gone, but because she was no longer facing it. Alone, the hoofbeats reached the pass behind them, the sound echoing faintly against the stone, then slowing, shifting, uncertain for the first time, as if the riders had lost the clear line they had been following. Ethan listened without turning, the smallest change in sound enough to tell him what was happening. They had reached the narrowing, they had seen the tracks, and now they would have to choose, follow through the pass or search for another way around, either choice costing them time. And time was what he had been buying with every step since he found her. He exhaled slowly, not relief, not yet, just a brief acknowledgement that the plan was holding. For now, Naeli felt it too, the subtle shift in the tension behind them, the way the sound changed from certain to questioning, and something inside her loosened just a fraction, not enough to relax, but enough to breathe. "You are not afraid of them," she said after a moment, her tone more curious than anything else. Ethan shook his head slightly. "I did not say that," he replied, and there was honesty in it, clear and steady. "I just do not let it decide where I go." Naeli looked at him again, really looked this time, not at the hat or the boots or the quiet way he carried himself, but at the space around him, the way he moved through the world without asking permission from it. And for the first time, the question in her eyes was not about him, but about herself, about whether she had ever done the same. The wind moved through the broken land, softer now, carrying less dust, more cool air as evening approached. And as the distance between them and the riders stretched just a little wider, Naeli shifted in the saddle, her body still aching, still heavy, but no longer collapsing under its own weight. Her hand rested lightly against the saddle now, not gripping, not holding on out of fear, but simply there, steady, present, and Ethan, walking beside her, did not look back again, because for now, they were not being chased, they were moving forward, and that was enough. The last light of day stretched low across the broken land, turning every rock and ridge into long shadows that blurred the edges of distance, and Ethan slowed the horse to a near stop, his hand lifting slightly on the reins as if listening not with his ears, but with the ground itself. Naeli felt it immediately, the change in rhythm, the quiet pause that carried more weight than movement ever could, her body stiffening just a fraction as she scanned the horizon, the silence around them deeper now, not empty, but watchful, the kind of silence that waited for something to reveal itself. "Why are we stopping?" she asked, her voice steady but low. careful not to disturb whatever balance had settled over the land. Ethan did not answer right away, his gaze fixed on a shallow dip ahead where the earth curved inward just enough to hide what lay beyond, the kind of place that could shelter a man or conceal one, depending on who reached it first, because they will not stay confused for long. He said finally, his tone unchanged, but his eyes sharper now, measuring something unseen. Nayeli followed his line of sight, her breath slowing as she tried to read the land the way he did, but to her it still looked like nothing more than dust and stone. "You think they will find the pass?" she said, not as a question but as a conclusion forming in her mind. Ethan nodded once, small, certain. "They already have," he replied, and there was no fear in it. Only timing. Always timing. He stepped closer to the horse, resting his hand lightly against Nayeli's leg to steady her as she shifted in the saddle. The contact brief. Necessary. Nothing more. "We do not outrun them," he continued, his voice calm as ever. "We outlast them." Nayeli looked down at him, her brow tightening slightly, not in doubt, but in the effort of understanding a way of thinking that was not her own. "And how do you do that?" she asked. Ethan glanced toward the dip again, then back at her. "By making them choose wrong," he said, and for a moment that was all he offered, as if the rest of the explanation belonged to the land itself. He reached for the saddle, adjusting the strap with a practiced motion, then stepped back, his eyes scanning the ground behind them, their tracks still faint but visible enough for someone determined to follow. "We go down there," he said, nodding toward the shallow curve in the earth. "Then we disappear." Nayeli's gaze lingered on the path, her instincts pulling in two directions at once, forward into the unknown or away from it entirely. But the sound behind them answered again, faint but steady. The riders had not stopped, they had only slowed, and now they were finding their way again. Her hand tightened slightly on the saddle, not from fear alone, but from the weight of choosing. "All right," she said quietly, the word carrying more than agreement. It carried trust, not fully formed, not complete, but enough to move forward. Ethan did not acknowledge it with words, only with action, guiding the horse toward the dip, his steps careful, angled, avoiding the softest patches of ground where tracks would hold, the descent shallow but uneven, the earth cooler as they moved into the shadow, the air shifting with it, carrying less heat, more stillness. As they reached the bottom, the land opened just enough to reveal a narrow line of scrub and rock that ran along the curve, not obvious from above, not unless you knew exactly where to look. Ethan led the horse along it, the path bending slightly, then narrowing again, until it seemed to vanish into nothing more than scattered brush. Nayeli watched closely now, her earlier uncertainty replaced by focus, by the need to understand each choice he made, because her survival was tied to it, whether she admitted that to herself or not. "Here," Ethan said softly, stopping near a cluster of low brush. He reached up, steadying her as she slid from the saddle, her legs weak but holding, her balance uncertain but present. The ground beneath her feet felt different here, firmer, less forgiving. She leaned slightly as she stood, her hand brushing against his arm without thinking, and he did not move away, did not acknowledge it, just remained steady until she found her footing, then stepped back, giving her space again. Always that balance, never too close, never too far. He turned then, leading the horse a few yards away, circling back along a different angle, his boots pressing into the ground with deliberate weight, leaving a clear line of tracks that veered away from where she stood. Then after a short distance, he turned again, stepping carefully along a rocky edge where the ground would not hold his passage, returning to her side. Without leaving a clear path behind him, Nayeli watched in silence, understanding forming piece by piece. "You are giving them a trail," she said, her voice low, almost impressed. Ethan nodded once. "A trail they will follow," he replied, then glanced toward the ridge behind them, where the fading light made shapes harder to read but not impossible. "And a trail that does not lead here." Nayeli exhaled slowly, the tension in her shoulders easing just a fraction, not because the danger was gone, but because for the first time since it began, she could see a way through it, not just running, not just surviving, but outthinking what chased her. She leaned lightly against one of the rocks, her strength returning in small, quiet increments, her breathing steadier now, her mind clearer, and as the distant sound of hoofbeats reached the edge of the pass once more, echoing faintly across the land, she did not look back this time. She looked at Ethan instead, really looked, and for the first time, the question in her eyes was not about whether she should trust him, but why she already did. The land held its breath as the last light slipped behind the ridge, leaving only a thin band of amber along the horizon, and Ethan stood still beside the low brush, his hand resting lightly on the horse's neck, feeling the slow, steady rhythm beneath the skin, while Nayeli leaned against the rock, her breathing finally evening out, not fully steady, but no longer breaking apart with every inhale. The air cooler now, carrying the quiet of night settling in, and with it, a different kind of tension, not the sharp edge of pursuit, but the waiting that followed it, the kind that asked whether the danger had truly passed or simply changed direction. The distant hoofbeats returned again, softer this time, more scattered, as if the riders had split their path, some following the false trail, others searching, uncertain, testing the land the way Ethan had predicted. Nayeli's eyes lifted toward the sound, but she did not move, did not step away from where she stood, her body learning stillness the way it had once learned flight. "They are not all following your trail," she said quietly, her voice carrying a new clarity, not fear, just observation. Ethan nodded once, his gaze fixed on the darkening ridge. "No," he said, "the smart ones never do." And there was no bitterness in his tone, no judgment, just recognition, the kind that came from knowing how men thought when they believed they were close to something they wanted. Nayeli shifted slightly, her hand brushing against the rock as she straightened, testing her balance, her strength returning in careful pieces. "Then what happens when they choose right?" she asked, and this time there was something else in her voice, not doubt, but curiosity, as if she was no longer asking whether they would survive, but how. Ethan glanced at her briefly, his expression unchanged, calm as ever. "Then we make another choice," he said, simple, steady, like it was the most natural thing in the world. Nayeli held his gaze for a moment longer, then looked away, her thoughts settling into something quieter, something that no longer fought every answer he gave. The wind moved through the brush, soft now, carrying the faint rustle of dry leaves, and for a moment, the world felt still enough to breathe. Ethan stepped forward then, moving a few feet to the side, his boots careful against the ground, avoiding loose stones that might shift under weight. He crouched slightly, brushing his fingers across the earth, feeling the texture, the firmness, the way it held or did not hold what passed over it. Then he stood again, turning back toward her. "We stay here until they pass," he said, his voice low, but certain. Nayeli nodded once, easing herself down to sit against the rock, her movements slower now, more controlled, no longer collapsing under the weight of exhaustion, her hand resting lightly against her side, not pressing, just aware, the pain still there, but quieter, no longer demanding all of her attention. Ethan remained standing, his position angled slightly between her and the open land, not as a barrier, not as a guard, just as a presence, steady, unspoken, the kind that did not need to be explained. The hoofbeats shifted again, one set growing louder for a moment, passing closer than the others, then fading as it followed the false trail into the distance. Another set lingered, slower, more cautious, circling, searching, and Nayeli felt her breath tighten just slightly at the sound, her fingers curling against the dust, but she did not rise, did not reach for the blade hidden beneath her clothing. She stayed where she was, trusting the stillness, trusting the quiet decisions Ethan had made long before she understood them. Minutes passed, or maybe longer. Time stretched differently in the dark, measured, not by the sun but by sound and silence. The riders moved on, one by one, their presence fading into the distance until only the wind remained, soft and steady, brushing against the land as if nothing had ever disturbed it. Ethan did not move right away, did not speak. He waited, listening for the absence of sound as much as the presence of it, and only when the silence settled fully did he let out a slow breath, not relief, not yet, just acknowledgement. Nayeli watched him, her eyes following. The small shift in his posture, the way his shoulders eased just slightly, and something inside her mirrored that change, her own tension loosening in quiet response. "They are gone," she said, not asking. Ethan nodded once. "For now," he replied, and there was no false promise in it. Only truth, the kind that did not try to soften what came next. Naeli leaned her head back against the rock, her eyes closing for a brief moment. Not sleep, just rest, the kind that came when the body finally believed it might have a chance to recover. And in that moment, the weight she had been carrying since before he found her shifted again, not gone, not yet, but lighter, as if sharing it had changed its shape. She opened her eyes after a moment, her gaze drifting toward him, and this time there was no question there, no hesitation, just quiet understanding. "You did not ask me what I did," she said, her voice softer now, almost reflective. Ethan looked at her, his expression steady, unchanged. "You were not ready to tell it," he said, and that was all. No pressure, no expectation, just patience. Naeli studied him for a long moment, the silence between them no longer empty, but full of something unspoken, something steady. "And if I never am?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Ethan's gaze did not shift, did not waver. "Then it stays yours," he said, simple, certain, and in that answer, there was no judgment, no need to know, no demand for truth beyond what she chose to give. And for the first time and longer than she could remember, Naeli felt something she had not allowed herself to feel. Not safety, not yet, but the possibility of it. Quiet, fragile, but real enough to hold on to. The night settled fully now, not sudden but slow, like a blanket drawn over the land, and the last trace of light faded into a deep blue that blurred the edges of everything, turning distance into shadow and shadow into something almost alive. Naeli remained seated against the rock, her breathing steady, her eyes open, adjusting to the dark as her senses shifted from sight to sound, to feeling, to the quiet rhythm of the world around her. Ethan moved with the same calm precision as before, gathering small pieces of dry brush and arranging them in a shallow circle near the rock. Not enough for a fire that could be seen from far away, just enough for warmth if needed, just enough to break the chill that crept in with the night air. He struck a small flame, shielding it with his hands until it caught, the faint glow flickering low, casting soft light that barely reached beyond a few feet, enough to see, not enough to reveal. Naeli watched him without speaking, the way he controlled even something as simple as light telling her more than any explanation could. This was a man who did not waste movement, did not invite attention, did not leave things to chance. The flame settled, quiet and steady, and Ethan sat down across from her, not too close, not too far, the same careful distance he had kept since the beginning, the kind that gave space without creating separation. For a while neither of them spoke, the silence no longer heavy, no longer filled with tension, just present, like the wind or the dark, something that did not need to be filled. Naeli lowered her gaze to the small fire, watching the way it moved, the way it shifted without ever breaking, and something about it pulled at her, something familiar in its quiet persistence. "When I was a child," she said after a long moment, her voice softer than before, not fragile, but distant, as if she was speaking from somewhere far behind her. "My grandmother told me that fire remembers everything it touches." Ethan did not interrupt, did not question. He simply listened, his posture still, his attention steady, the way a man listens when he knows the words matter more than any answer he could give. Naeli's fingers moved slightly in the dust beside her, tracing nothing, just moving. "She said that even when it goes out, the memory stays in the ash," she continued, her eyes fixed on the flame. "And if you are not careful, you carry that memory with you long after the fire is gone." The words hung there, quiet, but heavy with meaning. Ethan shifted slightly, resting his forearms on his knees, his gaze on the same small flame. "Sounds like she knew what she was talking about," he said, his voice low, respectful, not dismissing, not adding more than needed. Naeli let out a small breath, something between agreement and something else, something harder to name. "She also said that some fires are not meant to be carried," she added, her voice tightening just a fraction. "But sometimes you do not get to choose." The wind moved gently through the broken land, brushing against the edges of their small circle of light, and for a moment the flame flickered, bending, but not going out. Ethan reached forward slightly, adjusting one of the small pieces of brush, steadying it, not trying to control it, just giving it what it needed to hold. "You do not always get to choose what happens," he said after a moment, his voice calm. "Even, but you get to choose what you do with it after." Nayeli looked up at him then, her eyes searching his face, not for answers, but for something else, something she had not named yet. "And if what you did cannot be undone?" she asked, her voice quieter now, almost lost in the sound of the wind. Ethan held her gaze, his expression unchanged, but there was something deeper there now, something that had not been visible before, not pain, not regret, but understanding. "Then you carry it," he said simply, "just not the way it was given to you." Nayeli's brow furrowed slightly, the meaning settling in slowly, not all at once, not easy, but real. She looked back at the flame, her thoughts moving in quiet circles, the weight she had been holding shifting again, not gone, not yet, but different, shaped by something outside of herself for the first time. The night deepened around them, the stars beginning to appear above, faint at first, then stronger as the darkness settled fully, the land stretching out in every direction, silent, endless. And for the first time since the chase began, there was no sound behind them, no hoofbeats, no voices, just the wind and the quiet crackle of the small fire. Nayeli adjusted her position slightly, her body easing against the rock, her strength returning in slow, steady pieces. "You speak like a man who has carried something," she said after a while, her voice no longer distant, but present, grounded in the moment. Ethan did not look away from the flame, his eyes steady, his posture unchanged. "Everyone out here carries something," he replied, and there was no weight in the words, no attempt to make it more than it was, just truth, simple and clear. Nayeli watched him for a moment longer, then nodded slightly, as if accepting that answer, not because it explained everything, but because it did not need to. The silence returned, but it was different now, no longer empty, no longer uncertain. It held something between them, something quiet, something steady, something that did not need to be named to be understood. And as the fire burned low and the night stretched on, Nayeli felt the edge of her exhaustion settle in, not overwhelming, not consuming, just present, the kind that allowed rest instead of demanding escape. Her eyes lowered again, her breathing slowing. And for the first time since she had run, since she had fallen, since she had said those words she could not take back, she did not feel like she was breaking. She felt like she was holding together, just enough to keep going. And across from her, Ethan remained still, watching the fire, listening to the land, and saying nothing at all. The fire had burned down to a low glow, more ember than flame, casting a dim pulse of orange against the stone as the night deepened into something heavier, something that pressed gently against the edges of sound. And for a while neither of them moved, not because there was nothing to say, but because whatever needed saying had not found its moment yet. Nayeli's breathing slowed further, her body leaning into the rock not out of weakness now, but out of quiet acceptance, the kind that comes when the fight inside a person finally loosens its grip. And Ethan remained across from her, still as before, his presence steady, grounded, like something the land itself had placed there, watching not her, not the fire, but the space between, the way a man watches for what might shift when everything else appears still. The wind carried a faint chill now, brushing across the open land and slipping between the rocks. And Nayeli pulled her arms closer without thinking, the movement, small but instinctive, and before the cold could settle fully, Ethan reached behind him, lifting a folded blanket from the saddle, worn and faded, the kind that had seen more nights than days, and he stepped closer, not quickly, not suddenly, just enough, holding it out without a word. Nayeli looked at it, then at him, her expression unreadable for a moment, not resistance, not acceptance, just consideration, as if even something as simple as warmth carried weight now. Then she took it, her fingers brushing his for the briefest second, the contact quiet, unspoken, but real. She wrapped it around her shoulders, the rough fabric holding the day's heat, and something in her posture eased just slightly, not enough to notice unless you were looking for it. And Ethan stepped back again, returning to his place without comment, the distance between them settling into something familiar, something balanced. the kind that did not need to be measured anymore. Minutes passed, or maybe longer, time moving in slow, quiet steps, until Nayeli spoke again, her voice low, but no longer distant. "They will come back at first light," she said, not asking, not guessing, just knowing. Ethan nodded once, his gaze lifting briefly toward the stars now filling the sky. "Most likely," he replied, and there was no tension in the words, no urgency, just acknowledgement of what the morning would bring. Nayeli adjusted the blanket slightly, her fingers tracing the edge of it, as if grounding herself in something tangible, something present. "Then we should leave before that," she said, her tone steady, more certain now than it had been hours ago. Ethan looked at her then, not long, just enough to meet her eyes. "We will," he said, simple, direct, and again, that quiet certainty settled between them, the kind that did not need to be questioned. Nayeli held his gaze for a moment longer, then looked away, her eyes drifting toward the dark horizon, and something in her expression shifted, something deeper than exhaustion, deeper than fear, something closer to decision. "If I tell you," she said slowly, the words forming with care, "what they think I did, will you still help me?" The question hung in the air, soft but heavy, not just about him, but about everything that had led her here. Ethan did not answer right away, not because he did not know, but because he understood what the question carried, what it meant to ask it. His hands rested loosely in front of him, his posture unchanged, but his attention fully on her now. "That depends," he said finally, his voice calm, steady as always. Nayeli's brow tightened slightly, not in anger, but in anticipation. "On what?" she asked, her voice quieter now, more vulnerable than before. Ethan held her gaze, not turning away, not softening the truth. "On whether you are asking me to judge you," he said, "or to stand with you." The words settled between them, simple, but clear, and for a moment Nayeli said nothing, her eyes searching his face, measuring the weight of what he had just given her, because it was not an answer, not the kind she expected, but something else entirely, something that shifted the choice back to her. The fire flickered once, then settled again, and the wind moved softly through the broken land, carrying the quiet of the night with it. Nayeli lowered her gaze, her fingers tightening slightly around the edge of the blanket, the rough fabric grounding her as she considered. And when she spoke again, her voice was different, not distant, not guarded, but real in a way it had not been before. "I am asking you to understand," she said, and there was no strength in it, no defense, just truth, plain and unprotected. Ethan nodded once, slow, deliberate, and something in his expression shifted, not visibly, not in a way most would notice, but enough to show that he had heard her, that he had accepted what she was offering without asking for more. "Then tell me when you are ready," he said, and that was all. No pressure, no demand, just space, the kind that allowed a person to speak when the words finally found their way out. Nayeli looked at him again, and this time there was no question in her eyes, no hesitation, just a quiet recognition of something she had not expected to find out here, in the middle of nowhere, with a man she did not know, something steady, something patient, something that did not try to take from her, only to hold what she chose to give. And as the night stretched on and the fire burned lower, she pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders, her body settling, her breathing slowing, and for the first time since she began running, she allowed her eyes to close, not fully, not deeply, but enough to rest, knowing that if she needed to wake, she would. And across from her, Ethan remained as he was, still, watchful, listening to the land, waiting for the moment when silence would no longer mean safety. And until then, saying nothing at all. The night did not end all at once. It loosened its grip slowly, like a hand opening finger by finger, and somewhere beyond the broken ridge a pale line of gray began to form, thin as a blade at first, then widening with each passing minute. And Ethan noticed it before the light touched the ground, before the shadows shifted, before the air changed. He stood quietly from where he had been sitting, his movements careful, practiced, the kind that did not wake a resting animal or a sleeping person unless it needed to. Nayeli stirred anyway, not because of sound, but because something inside her had learned not to sleep too deeply. Not anymore. Her eyes opened slowly, adjusting to the dim light. The first thing she saw was the outline of Ethan against the rising dawn, still and steady as he had been through the night. And for a moment she did not move, just watched, the memory of everything that had happened settling back into place, not with panic, not with urgency, but with a quiet awareness that the pause had ended. "It is time," he said without turning, his voice low, even as if he had known she was awake before she did. Nayeli pushed herself up slowly, the blanket slipping from her shoulders as she moved, her body stiff but responsive. The sharp edge of pain dulled now into something she could carry without losing her balance. She folded the blanket without thinking, hands moving out of habit, then paused, holding it for a moment before extending it toward him. Ethan glanced at it, then shook his head slightly. "Keep it," he said. Simple. Without hesitation, Nayeli did not argue. She wrapped it loosely around her shoulders again, the fabric grounding her in a way she had not expected. Something steady in a world that had not been steady for a long time. The sky shifted from gray to pale gold, the land revealing itself again in layers, the rocks, the brush, the narrow path they had taken, all clearer now. And with that clarity came the return of everything waiting beyond it, the riders, the questions, the truth she had not yet spoken. Ethan moved toward the horse, checking the straps, the reins, every small detail with quiet precision, then turned back to her. "We leave now," he said, not as a suggestion, not as a command, just the next step in a path already chosen. Nayeli nodded once, stepping toward him, her movements steadier than before, not because she was fully healed, but because something inside her had shifted, something that no longer pulled her backward with every step forward. He helped her onto the horse again, the motion smooth, careful, his hands steady but never holding longer than needed. And when she settled into the saddle, her balance held without the same strain as before, her body remembering strength in small, quiet ways. Ethan took the reins and began to lead them out of the shallow dip, choosing a different direction this time, not back the way they came, not forward along the obvious path, but angled, cutting across the land in a way that left no clear line to follow. The ground firmer here, less forgiving to tracks, the kind of terrain that did not easily give up its secrets. They moved in silence for a while, the early light stretching across the land, the wind still soft, the world holding that brief moment of calm before the day fully began. Nayeli watched the horizon, then glanced down at Ethan, her thoughts circling something she could no longer keep buried, something that had followed her here and would not be left behind no matter how far she rode. "I am ready," she said finally, her voice quiet but steady. Ethan did not stop, did not turn, but his pace slowed just enough to listen, to give the words space to exist. Nayeli took a breath, not sharp, not broken, just deliberate. "They think I betrayed my own people," she said, the words simple, but heavy with everything they carried. The wind moved lightly across them, as if trying to take the words and scatter them, but they stayed, solid, present. Ethan's expression did not change, his steps did not falter, he only nodded once, acknowledging, not judging, not questioning, just receiving. Nayeli continued, her gaze fixed ahead, not on him, not on the past, but somewhere in between. "There was a man," she said slowly, choosing each word with care. "Not from my tribe, not from yours, someone who did not belong to either world. He came with promises, with words that sounded like peace, like a future without fighting." Her fingers tightened slightly on the saddle, the memory pressing closer now, clearer. "Some believed him, some did not. I was told to watch him, to listen, to understand what he wanted." She paused, her breath catching just slightly, not from weakness, but from the weight of what came next. "And I did," she said, quieter now. "I listened, I followed, I learned, and when I realized what he truly wanted, it was already too late." Ethan glanced up at her then, just briefly, not interrupting, just present. Nayeli's voice softened. Further, not breaking, but lowering, like something being set down carefully. "He was not bringing peace," she said. "He was bringing others, men who would take land, who would change everything, and I could not let that happen." The land stretched out before them, quiet, open, but her words filled it now, reshaping the space between them. "So I made a choice," she continued, "one that no one saw, one that no one understood. And when it was done, he was gone, and the only story left was that I had helped him, that I had stood beside him instead of against him. The silence that followed was not empty. It was full of meaning, of consequence, of everything that could not be undone. Ethan walked a few more steps before speaking, his voice calm, steady, unchanged. And the truth? He asked, simple, direct. Nayeli closed her eyes for a brief moment, then opened them again, her gaze steady now, no longer running. The truth is not what they needed, she said. So they chose something else. Ethan nodded once, his eyes returning to the path ahead. People do that, he said quietly. And that was all. No judgment, no doubt, just acceptance of a truth larger than either of them. Nayeli watched him for a moment, searching for something in his reaction, something that would tell her what came next. But there was nothing to read, only the same quiet certainty he had carried since the beginning. And for the first time since she had spoken, she felt the weight shift again, not gone, not forgiven, but shared, just enough to carry forward. And as the sun rose higher and the land opened before them once more, she did not feel like she was running anymore. She felt like she was finally moving towards something she could face. The sun rose higher, casting long bands of light across the open land. And with it came clarity, not just to the ground beneath them, but to the space between them. The silence after Nayeli's words settling into something steady, something that did not need to be filled with questions or doubt. Ethan kept walking beside the horse, his pace unchanged, his gaze fixed ahead, but something in the way he carried himself had shifted, not in posture, not in movement, but in presence, as if what she had shared had found a place within him without resistance, without judgment. Nayeli watched him for a moment, searching for a reaction that never came, and slowly, she understood that this was his answer, not spoken, not explained, but lived in the way he continued forward as if nothing about her truth made her less worthy of the path they were on. The wind picked up slightly, carrying warmth now instead of the cool of night, brushing against her face, lifting strands of her dark hair as she looked out across the land. And for the first time since she had spoken, the horizon did not feel like something she needed to escape. It felt like something she could walk into. "You do not think I am guilty," she said after a while, her voice calm, not defensive, just curious. Ethan did not look up, his boots pressing into the earth with the same steady rhythm. "I think you made a choice," he said simply, and there was no weight in the words, no need to add more. Nayeli's brow tightened slightly, not in confusion, but in thought. "That is not the same thing," she said, quieter now. Ethan nodded once. "No," he replied. "It is not." And again, nothing more, no attempt to define her, no attempt to place her within a story he did not own. Nayeli let out a slow breath, something inside her easing further, not because she had been forgiven, but because she had not been condemned. The difference subtle, but real. The land shifted again as they moved, the broken terrain giving way to a more open stretch, but not as exposed as before. Scattered trees rising in the distance, their branches thin but enough to break the line of sight, enough to offer cover if needed. Ethan angled toward them without hesitation, adjusting their course with the same quiet certainty he had shown since the beginning. "We rest there," he said, nodding toward the trees. Nayeli followed his gaze, her eyes narrowing slightly as she measured the distance, the terrain, the possibility of being seen, but she did not question it. Not this time. She simply nodded, her trust no longer tentative, but forming into something she did not need to examine with every step. They reached the trees just as the sun cleared the ridge fully, the light filtering through the sparse branches, casting uneven shadows across the ground. Ethan guided the horse into the shade, then stopped, his hand resting briefly on the reins before releasing them, allowing the animal to lower its head and breathe. Nayeli shifted in the saddle, then swung her leg over slowly, her body still stiff but responsive, and when her feet touched the ground, she did not falter. She stood, steady, balanced, the strength in her returning not all at once, but enough to stand on her own. Ethan watched briefly, then turned away, giving her space without making it obvious, his attention moving to the ground, to the surrounding area, always aware, always measuring. Nayeli took a few steps forward, testing her footing, her balance, the way her body responded, and for the first time since the fall, since the pain had overtaken her, she felt control again. Not complete, not perfect, but present. She looked back at him then, her expression different now, not guarded, not distant, but open in a way she had not allowed before. "You never asked what I would do next," she said, her voice steady. Ethan glanced at her, his expression calm. "You are still deciding," he said, and there was no question in it, only certainty. Nayeli held his gaze, then nodded slowly. Because he was right, she was still deciding, not just where to go, but who she would be when she got there. The silence settled again, but it was no longer uncertain. It was filled with something steady, something that did not need to be named. The wind moved gently through the trees, carrying the sound of distant birds, the first signs of life returning to the land as the day began. And for a moment, everything felt still, not because nothing was happening, but because what mattered was happening quietly. Inside, Ethan moved toward the horse again, checking the saddle, the straps, every small detail, then reached into a small pack and pulled out a canteen, offering it to her without a word. Nayeli took it, her fingers brushing his again, and this time, neither of them pulled away quickly, the contact lingering just long enough to be noticed, then gone. She took a small drink, the water cool against her throat, grounding her further in the moment, in the present. When she handed it back, her hand did not tremble, her grip steady, her eyes meeting his without hesitation. "They will not stop looking for me," she said, not as a warning, but as a truth she had accepted. Ethan nodded once. "No," he replied, and again, no fear, no urgency, just acknowledgement. Nayeli's gaze did not waver. "And you will stay," she said, not asking, not doubting, just stating what she had begun to understand. Ethan met her eyes, his expression unchanged, but his voice carried that same quiet certainty that had held her together when everything else had fallen apart. "Until you can stand without me," he said, and the words settled between them. Simple, clear, and for the first time, Nayeli did not feel the need to question what came next. She only nodded, because somewhere along the path they had taken, between the silence and the words, between the fear and the stillness, she had already begun to believe in the air beneath the trees held a different kind of quiet. Not the open silence of the desert, but something closer, something that pressed in gently from all sides. And Ethan stood near the edge of the shade, his eyes scanning beyond the thin line of branches, always watching, always measuring what could not yet be seen. Nayeli remained a few steps behind him, her posture steady now, her weight balanced evenly on both feet, the ache in her body no longer controlling her movements, only reminding her that it was still there. And for a moment neither of them spoke, not because there was nothing left to say, but because the next step had not yet revealed itself. The wind shifted lightly through the trees, carrying with it a faint change in sound, not as clear as hoofbeats, not as certain, but enough to draw Ethan's attention. His head turning slightly, his focus narrowing, Nayeli noticed the change immediately, the subtle tightening in his stance, the way his stillness became sharper, more deliberate. "They found something," she said quietly, her voice calm but alert. Ethan did not answer right away, his gaze fixed on a distant rise beyond the trees where the land curved just enough to hide movement. "They found the wrong trail," he said after a moment, but his tone carried a note of caution now, something that acknowledged the situation was shifting, not ending. Nayeli stepped closer, not out of fear, but out of awareness, her presence aligning with his without needing to be asked. "Then why stop here?" she asked, her eyes following his line of sight. Ethan exhaled slowly, his hand resting near the saddle as if grounding himself in the present moment. "Because this is where the wrong trail becomes the right question," he said, and the words hung there, simple but layered. Nayeli frowned slightly, not in confusion, but in thought, the meaning forming slowly as she watched the horizon, the way a hunter learns to see not just what is there, but what should not be. "They will split again," she said, her voice steady. Ethan nodded once. "And this time, they will not all choose wrong," he replied, and there was no tension in it, only recognition, the kind that came from understanding how persistence reshaped decisions. Nayeli felt the weight of that settle, not heavy, not overwhelming, but real, And for a moment she said nothing, her mind moving through the path ahead, not as something to escape, but something to face. Then we do not wait, she said finally, her voice firm. Carrying a clarity that had not been there before, Ethan turned to look at her fully then, not long. Just enough to see the change, the shift from reacting to deciding. And something in his expression acknowledged it, quiet, but certain. No, he agreed. We do not. He moved toward the horse again, his hands steady as he adjusted the reins, preparing to move, but slower this time, not with urgency, but with intent, as if the next direction mattered more than speed. Nayeli stepped closer, stopping just within reach, her gaze steady on him. I will not run anymore, she said, not loud, not dramatic, just clear, and the words carried more weight than anything she had said before. Ethan met her eyes, his expression unchanged, but his voice held that same quiet certainty that had guided every step since the beginning. Then we choose where to stand, he said, and the meaning settled between them, not as a question, but as a path. Nayeli nodded once, slow, deliberate, her decision forming fully now, not from fear, not from exhaustion, but from something deeper, something that had been waiting beneath everything else. There is a place, she said, her voice steady, north of here, where the land rises and the water runs shallow. It is where my people pass when they move between valleys. She paused, her gaze fixed ahead. If they are searching, they will go there. Ethan listened without interruption, his attention focused fully on her now, not the land, not the horizon, but her. And if we go there? He asked, simple, direct. Nayeli did not hesitate this time. Then I do not run from them, she said. I meet them. The words settled into the space between them, not as defiance, not as challenge, but as truth, the kind that does not need to raise its voice to be heard. Ethan nodded once, his gaze steady. Then that is where we go, he said, and there was no hesitation in it, no need to question the risk. The choice had already been made the moment she spoke it. The wind moved through the trees again, stronger now, carrying the warmth of the rising sun, and with it, the sense that time was moving forward whether they were ready or not. Nayeli stepped closer to the horse, her movements sure, her body responding without the same strain as before, and when Ethan helped her into the saddle, the motion was smooth, natural, no longer something she had to fight against. He took the reins once more, but this time, there was a difference, not in his grip, not in his pace, but in the direction, not angled away, not avoiding, but moving towards something, something chosen, something accepted. As they stepped out from the shade of the trees and back into the open land, the light met them fully, the horizon stretching wide and clear, and for the first time since the chase began, Nayeli did not look behind them at what followed. She looked ahead, toward where she would stand, and beside her, Ethan walked with the same quiet steadiness as before, not leading her away, but walking with her toward whatever waited there. The land rose slowly beneath them as they moved north, not steep, not dramatic, but enough to change the rhythm of each step, enough to remind anyone crossing it that this was not ground meant for hesitation. Ethan walked with the same steady pace, his eyes scanning ahead, not searching for danger now, but for alignment, for the place Nayeli had spoken of, while she sat in the saddle above him, her posture straighter than it had been since the beginning, her gaze fixed forward with a clarity that came from decision, not from certainty. The wind moved stronger across the open stretch, carrying the scent of water faint but present, and with it, something else, something older, something familiar to her. We are close, she said, her voice steady, no longer weighed down by doubt. Ethan nodded once, adjusting their path slightly to follow the subtle curve of the land, the ground beneath them shifting from dry dust to firmer soil, marked by faint traces of past movement, not fresh, but not forgotten either, the kind of place where footsteps told stories if you knew how to read them. Nayeli saw it too, the signs of her people, small, careful, not meant to be obvious, but there if you belonged. Her fingers tightened slightly on the saddle, not from fear, but from recognition, from the knowledge that what lay ahead was no longer unknown. The rise leveled out as they reached the shallow water she had described, a narrow stream, cutting quietly through the land, its surface catching the sunlight in broken reflections, and beyond it, The ground opened into a wide clearing framed by scattered trees and low ridges, a place that held both exposure and shelter, depending on how it was approached. Ethan slowed as they reached the edge, his hand lifting slightly on the reins, not stopping, just measuring, always measuring. Naeli's breath shifted, not sharp, not panicked, but aware, fully present in the moment she had chosen. "They will come from there," she said, nodding toward the southern ridge, her voice calm, grounded in knowledge. Ethan followed her gaze, his expression unchanged, but his stance adjusting subtly, positioning himself without thinking, placing them where the land gave them the best view without exposing them more than necessary. "Then we wait here," he said, not as a question, but as the natural next step. Naeli nodded once, sliding from the saddle without assistance this time, her movements controlled, deliberate, her feet landing firmly on the ground. And when she stood, she did not lean, did not falter. She stood on her own, fully, completely, the difference small in appearance, but immense in meaning. Ethan noticed, of course he did, but he said nothing, only stepped back, giving her the space she no longer needed to ask for. The wind moved through the clearing, stronger now, carrying the sound of distant movement, not yet clear, but coming, the same rhythm that had followed them before, now returning, steady, certain. Naeli stepped forward, away from the horse, away from Ethan, not far, just enough to stand where the open land met the water, where she could be seen, where she could not be mistaken for someone hiding, her shoulders straight, her gaze fixed on the ridge, and for a moment, everything else fell away. The chase, the fear, the weight of what had happened, all of it narrowing into this single point, this single decision. Ethan remained where he was, not stepping beside her, not moving ahead, just present, just there, his position neither behind nor in front, but close enough that if she needed him, he would be there before she asked. The riders appeared, slowly over the ridge, first as shapes against the light, then as figures, then as men, their horses moving at a controlled pace, not rushing, not charging, but certain. They had found the place, just as she said they would. Naeli did not move, did not step back, did not reach for anything hidden. She simply stood, her presence clear, her choice visible, the distance between them closing with each step the riders took. The sound of hooves now distinct, echoing softly across the clearing. Ethan watched without tension, his posture unchanged, his attention sharp but calm, the kind of calm that did not come from ignorance, but from acceptance of what could not be avoided. The riders slowed as they approached the stream, their formation shifting slightly, not scattered, but no longer tight, as if uncertainty had begun to take hold, not of what they saw, but of what it meant. Naeli took a single breath, deep, steady, and when she spoke, her voice carried across the water without force, without strain. "I am here," she said, simple, clear, and the words settled into the space between them, not as a challenge, not as a defense, but as truth. The riders halted at the edge of the stream, their figures still, their attention fixed on her, and for a moment, the world held its breath, the wind pausing, the water moving quietly beneath the surface, the space between two sides balanced on something fragile, something unseen. Ethan did not move, did not speak. He simply stood where he was, his presence steady, his silence stronger than any word. And in that silence, Naeli did not feel alone, not because he stood beside her, but because he had never tried to stand in her place. The distance between them and the riders remained, not closing, not widening, just there, waiting, and for the first time since this began, the outcome did not feel like something chasing her. It felt like something she was ready to face. The space between them did not break with noise or motion. It held, steady and fragile, like a breath not yet released. And Naeli stood at the edge of the water with her shoulders straight and her gaze fixed on the men across from her, not as someone asking to be heard, but as someone who had already chosen to speak whether they listened or not. The riders remained still on the far side of the stream, their horses shifting slightly beneath them, their presence no longer advancing, no longer pressing forward, just waiting, measuring, uncertain in a way they had not been before, because this was not how they expected to find her, not standing, not still, not facing them without fear. The wind moved lightly across the clearing, brushing the surface of the water, carrying her voice and her presence without distortion, and for a moment, no one spoke. Then one of the riders eased his horse a step forward, not crossing the stream, just enough to be seen more clearly, his posture straight, his gaze fixed on her with something that was not anger, not yet, but something heavier, something that carried the weight of belief. "You should have kept running," he said, his voice firm but not raised, and the words landed without force, without accusation, just as a statement shaped by what he thought he knew. Naeli did not move, did not lower her gaze, her voice calm as she answered. "I did," she said, "until I understood that running would not change what you believe." The rider held her gaze, his expression tightening slightly, not in confusion, but in resistance. "And standing here will?" he asked, and again, not a challenge, just a question shaped by doubt. Naeli took a single breath, steady, controlled, and when she spoke again, her voice carried something different, not louder, not sharper, just clearer. "No," she said, "but it will change what I accept." The words settled into the space between them, quiet but unyielding, and something shifted then, not in the riders, not yet, but in the air itself, the balance tilting ever so slightly away from pursuit and towards something else, something harder to define. The rider studied her for a moment longer. Then his gaze flicked briefly to Ethan, standing off to the side, still, silent, present without stepping forward, without inserting himself into what was not his to claim. "You stand with him now?" the rider asked, his voice carrying a trace of something new, not accusation, but curiosity edged with caution. Naeli did not turn to look at Ethan. She did not need to. "No," she said simply. "He stands where I choose to stand." And the meaning in that answer was clear, not ownership, not alliance, but something quieter, something rooted in choice. The rider's expression shifted again, the certainty he had carried beginning to fracture, not breaking, but bending under something he had not expected. He glanced back at the others behind him, then returned his attention to her. "They say you led the outsider to us," he said, the words slower now, less certain. Naeli's gaze did not waver. "They say many things," she replied, and there was no bitterness in it, no defense, just truth, the kind that does not need to be protected. The silence that followed stretched longer this time. The riders no longer advancing, no longer closing the distance, their presence held at the edge of the water, as if crossing it would mean more than just movement, as if it would mean choosing something they were not ready to choose. Ethan remained where he was, his stance unchanged, his eyes steady, not on the riders, not on Naeli, but on the space between them, the place where decisions were made without words. And for the first time since they had appeared, the tension did not feel like something that would break. It felt like something that might settle, slowly, carefully. The rider shifted again in his saddle, his grip on the reins loosening just slightly, his posture no longer rigid, no longer certain. "If what you say is true," he began, then stopped, the rest of the thought not finding its way into words, because truth, once spoken, does not always fit into the shape people expect. Naeli watched him, not pressing, not pushing, just allowing the silence to hold what he could not yet say. And in that silence, something changed, not dramatic, not visible to anyone who was not looking for it, but real. The space between them no longer divided by certainty, but opened by doubt. The rider exhaled slowly, his gaze lowering for a brief moment before lifting again, and when he spoke, his voice had lost its edge. "We will not decide this here," he said, not to her, not to Ethan, but to the moment itself, as if acknowledging that what stood before him could not be resolved by force or assumption. Naeli nodded once, not in agreement, not in surrender, just in recognition. The riders began to turn their horses slowly, not retreating in defeat, not advancing in pursuit, but stepping back from something they had not expected to face, one by one, their movement quiet, controlled, the sound of hooves soft against the earth as they pulled away from the stream. The distance widening again, not as a chase, but as space, as choice, as possibility. And through it all, Naeli did not move, did not step back, did not follow. She simply stood, her posture steady, her presence unchanged. And when the last of the riders disappeared beyond the rise, the wind returned. The water moved as it had before, and the land settled back into its quiet. Ethan stepped forward then, not quickly, not urgently, just enough to stand beside her, not ahead, not behind, just there, his presence the same as it had been from the beginning, steady, unspoken. Naeli did not look at him right away, her gaze still fixed on the horizon where the riders had vanished, and when she finally spoke, her voice was softer, but no longer heavy. "They did not forgive me," she said, not as a question, not as a complaint, just as truth. Ethan nodded once, his eyes on the same distant line. "That was not yours to take," he replied, simple, certain. Naeli let out a slow breath, the weight she had carried shifting once more, not gone, not erased, but changed, reshaped into something she could carry without breaking. And after a moment, she turned to look at him, really look this time, and there was no question left in her eyes, no hesitation, just quiet understanding. "I can stand now," she said, and the words held more than their meaning. They held everything that had led her here, everything she had faced, everything she had chosen. Ethan met her gaze, his expression unchanged, but his voice carried that same quiet certainty. "I know," he said, and for a moment, neither of them moved. The space between them no longer distance, no longer uncertainty, just stillness. The kind that comes when something has finally settled. And then, without another word, Naeli turned toward the open land ahead, not running, not escaping, just moving forward, and Ethan remained where he was for a second longer, watching, then stepped back, not following, not leading, just allowing her path to be her own. And out here, under the wide sky and the quiet wind, that was enough.